The loudest knock I ever heard was not the one on that hotel door. It was the one that shattered every illusion I still had about my marriage. The hallway outside the honeymoon suite was silent except for the faint hum of the hotel ventilation system and the distant sound of an elevator opening somewhere down the corridor. I stood there holding a slim navy folder in one hand while watching the room number fixed to the polished wooden door. Inside that suite, my wife believed she was beginning a private chapter of her life that I would never know existed. She had no idea I had already spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. A sharp knock echoed through the hallway. I waited. Several seconds later, I heard footsteps moving toward the door. The lock clicked. The handle slowly turned. Jason Reed opened the door first, expecting to see a hotel employee. Instead, he found me standing there in a tailored navy suit with a calm expression and the folder resting comfortably against my side. His face lost every trace of confidence almost instantly. Behind him, Emily looked up from the living area of the suite. The smile she had been wearing disappeared before either of us spoke a single word. Her eyes widened with unmistakable shock. She stood completely still, as though time itself had paused inside that luxurious room. The elegant suite overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Fresh flowers decorated the dining table. Soft music played quietly through hidden ceiling speakers. Two suitcases rested near the bedroom entrance, making it painfully obvious they had planned to stay. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone. I simply looked at Emily and said, "I think we should have the conversation you have been avoiding." Neither of them answered. The silence carried far more weight than any argument could have. Looking back now, people often ask whether I felt anger standing outside that door. The truth surprises them every time. By the time I arrived at that hotel, anger had already been replaced by certainty. I had spent too many sleepless nights searching for answers to allow emotions to control me once the truth finally appeared. Everything inside that room confirmed what I had quietly suspected for months. Yet this story did not begin at the hotel. It began nearly 6 months earlier with changes so small that any husband deeply in love would probably have ignored them. Emily started working later than usual. Weekend conferences became more frequent. She smiled politely but seemed emotionally distant, as though part of her attention always belonged somewhere else. At first, I convinced myself every marriage experiences difficult seasons. Careers become demanding. Life becomes busy. Stress changes people. I accepted every explanation because trusting my wife had never required effort before. What I did not realize then was that betrayal rarely arrives as one dramatic event. It usually begins with ordinary moments that feel too insignificant to question until one day, every small detail quietly connects into a truth you can no longer ignore. Emily never noticed the moment I stopped accepting explanations and started paying attention to patterns. Looking back now, I do not blame her for that. Most people assume trust disappears with one dramatic discovery. In reality, it fades quietly, one unanswered question at a time. 6 months before I stood outside that hotel suite, our marriage still looked perfectly ordinary to everyone around us. We shared breakfast before work. We attended neighborhood gatherings together. We visited my parents on Sunday afternoons and laughed with friends who often told us we were one of the strongest couples they knew. I believe that too. That was probably why the earliest warning signs seemed so easy to dismiss. Emily accepted a larger role at her company, and naturally her schedule became more demanding. Evening meetings became common. Weekend conferences appeared on her calendar every few weeks. I encouraged her career because I was proud of everything she had accomplished. Whenever she apologized for coming home late, I smiled and told her not to worry. I wanted to be the husband who supported her ambitions instead of questioning them. Then small details began refusing to fit together. One Friday evening, she told me a client dinner had lasted longer than expected, yet the restaurant charge on our shared credit card account came from a town nearly 50 miles away from the office district she mentioned. I assumed the clients simply wanted somewhere different. A week later, she said she would attend a 2-day leadership seminar in San Diego. While helping organize household paperwork, I accidentally noticed an airline confirmation delivered to our shared email account before it disappeared into another folder. The flight destination listed Denver instead. I asked whether her plans had changed. She smiled naturally and explained the company had moved the event at the last minute. Her answer sounded reasonable enough that I never questioned it again, at least not aloud. The moment that truly unsettled me happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Emily was preparing dinner while her phone vibrated repeatedly on the kitchen counter. She stepped into the backyard to answer a call, leaving the illuminated screen visible for only a few seconds. I was not trying to read her messages, but one notification appeared clearly enough to catch my attention. The sender's name was Jason. The message contained only 6 words. Everything is ready for next month. Before I could think about what it meant, Emily returned inside, picked up her phone, and quietly dismissed the notification. When I casually asked who Jason was, she answered without hesitation. An old colleague helping organize the conference. Her voice remained steady. Her smile never changed. I wanted to believe her because trusting the person you love always feels easier than imagining another possibility. Even so, something inside me refused to settle. Rather than confronting her with assumptions, I bought a small notebook the following morning and began recording dates, conversations, travel schedules, and receipts connected to our shared accounts. I was not building a case against my wife. I was searching for clarity inside a situation that no longer made sense. Every new detail appeared harmless by itself. Together, however, they slowly formed a picture neither of us would be able to ignore much longer. And I still had no idea that the final piece of that picture would eventually lead me to the door of a luxury hotel hundreds of miles from home. The notebook inside my desk drawer slowly became the one thing I never expected to rely on. Every page contained nothing more than dates, locations, receipts, and small observations that seemed almost meaningless on their own. Yet every time I reviewed those notes, the same uncomfortable conclusion became harder to ignore. Emily's explanations always sounded believable until I compared them with the facts. Looking back now, I understand that I was not searching for proof of betrayal. I was searching for a reason to believe I had misunderstood everything. Unfortunately, that reason never appeared. About a month after I started keeping notes, Emily mentioned another business conference that would require her to travel for 3 days. She described keynote presentations, networking events, and executive workshops with enough detail that most people would never have questioned the story. I smiled, wished her good luck, and even helped her pack the evening before her flight. After she went upstairs to finish getting ready for bed, I noticed an email notification appear briefly on our shared family laptop before disappearing. It was a hotel confirmation. The reservation caught my attention because the room description was unusually specific. Instead of a standard business suite, it listed a honeymoon suite overlooking the city skyline. I stared at the screen for several seconds, convinced I had misunderstood what I was reading. Business travelers do not normally reserve honeymoon suites. The reservation also listed 2 registered guests, although only Emily was supposed to be attending the conference. I closed the computer without touching anything else. My heart wanted to reject what my eyes had just seen, but my mind refused to look away. The following morning, after Emily left for the airport, I quietly verified every detail I legally could through the confirmations connected to our shared travel rewards account and household finances. The conference itself was real, but the official schedule ended before the dates Emily had given me. The hotel reservation matched the extended stay instead. Then another familiar name appeared where I had hoped never to see it again. Jason Reed had booked a room at the same hotel during exactly the same period. I sat alone in my home office for nearly an hour, saying nothing while every piece of the puzzle finally settled into place. Even then, I refused to act impulsively. I scheduled a meeting with an experienced family law attorney, not because I had already decided to end my marriage, but because I believed understanding my legal and financial responsibilities was wiser than allowing shock to dictate my choices. The attorney encouraged me to document facts carefully, protect shared assets appropriately, and avoid emotional confrontations until I fully understood the situation. Her calm advice gave me something I desperately needed: direction. Over the next several days, I organized financial records, copied important household documents, reviewed insurance policies, and prepared a folder containing everything I might need if my marriage reached a point of no return. Each task felt painfully ordinary, yet completing them helped replace fear with clarity. By the time Emily boarded her flight, I had already accepted one important truth. Whatever happened next, I would face it with patience instead of anger. 2 days later, I arrived at the same luxury hotel, checked into a separate room under my own name, and quietly waited in the lobby until I saw Emily and Jason walk toward the elevators together. They never noticed me. I allowed them to disappear behind the closing elevator doors because I already knew exactly which suite they were entering. All I had left to decide was the right moment to knock. From the corner of the hotel lobby, I watched the elevator doors close and disappear toward the upper floors. Emily stood beside Jason with the same relaxed smile I had not seen at home in months. That image stayed with me far longer than I wanted it to. Even then, I did not rush upstairs. I remained seated in the quiet lounge overlooking the city, holding the navy folder on my lap, while reminding myself that every important decision deserved patience instead of impulse. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest part was never discovering the truth. The hardest part was refusing to let pain decide what happened next. Nearly an hour passed before I finally stood, walked across the polished marble floor, and stepped into the elevator. The ride to the executive level felt strangely ordinary. Soft instrumental music played through hidden speakers, and the display above the door quietly counted each floor. Nothing about the hotel suggested that one ordinary evening could permanently change 3 lives. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway stretched ahead beneath warm lighting and thick carpet that absorbed every footstep. I walked slowly until I reached the suite listed on the reservation confirmation I had already verified. For several moments, I simply stood outside the door, breathing steadily while listening to the silence beyond it. I was not there to create a public scene. I was there because avoiding the truth any longer would only prolong the damage already done. I raised my hand and knocked once. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps approaching from inside. The lock disengaged. The door opened. Jason stared at me with immediate confusion before his expression shifted into unmistakable surprise. Neither of us spoke. Behind him, Emily looked toward the entrance, expecting to see hotel staff. The color drained from her face the instant our eyes met. She remained frozen beside the sitting area, unable to hide the shock that spread across her expression. The elegant suite looked exactly as the reservation photographs had advertised. Large windows overlooked the evening skyline. A dining table had been prepared with fresh flowers and sparkling water. 2 travel bags rested beside the bedroom doorway. Every detail quietly confirmed what months of unanswered questions had been leading toward. I did not step aggressively into the room. Instead, I remained calm and spoke in the same measured voice I had used throughout our marriage. "Emily," I said gently, "I think we owe each other an honest conversation." She looked from me to Jason and back again, searching for words that never came. Jason quietly stepped aside without protest, his confidence disappearing almost as quickly as the surprise on his face. I walked into the suite, closed the door behind me, and placed the navy folder on the dining table. No one reached for it. No one argued. The silence itself seemed louder than any accusation could have been. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, how did you know?" I met her eyes without anger, because I stopped ignoring the questions neither of us wanted to answer. She lowered her head, understanding immediately that this meeting had not happened because of coincidence. It happened because every small decision made during the previous 6 months had quietly led all 3 of us to the same room. And for the first time since our marriage began to unravel, there was nowhere left for the truth to hide. Emily remained standing beside the window, unable to look directly at me for more than a few seconds at a time. The city lights reflected across the glass behind her, turning the luxurious suite into a place that suddenly felt much smaller than it had only moments earlier. Jason quietly stepped away from the dining table and remained near the entrance, saying nothing as the silence settled over the room. I rested my hand on the navy folder without opening it. There was no reason to rush. Looking back now, I realized that I had imagined this conversation hundreds of times during the previous weeks. In every version, I expected anger to take control the moment I finally stood face to face with the truth. Instead, I felt something entirely different. I felt tired. Tired of unanswered questions. Tired of pretending everything was normal. Most of all, I was tired of carrying doubts that neither of us had been willing to discuss honestly. Emily finally broke the silence. "Daniel, I never wanted you to find out like this." I nodded slowly. "Then how did you expect me to find out?" She opened her mouth, but no answer came. That single moment told me more than any explanation ever could. Some questions simply do not have comfortable answers. Jason quietly cleared his throat before speaking for the first time. I think I should leave. I looked toward him and answered calmly. That decision is yours. Emily closed her eyes briefly before turning toward him. Please go. He hesitated for only a moment, gathered his jacket from the chair beside the sofa, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced back once with an expression that mixed embarrassment and regret, then quietly disappeared into the hallway. The suite became completely silent again. Emily slowly lowered herself into one of the dining chairs while I sat across from her. Between us rested the folder that represented months of careful preparation. I gently opened it and slid the first few pages across the table. Airline confirmations. Hotel reservations connected through our shared travel account. Financial records showing overlapping dates. Notes documenting the timeline I had quietly assembled. Emily looked at the documents for only a few moments before lowering her eyes. She did not deny any of it. She did not search for excuses. Instead, she whispered the question I already knew was coming. How long have you known? I answered honestly. Long enough to stop guessing. Not long enough to stop hoping I was wrong. Tears slowly formed in her eyes. I kept telling myself I would explain everything when I came home. I looked at her quietly before responding. The hardest part was never waiting for an explanation. The hardest part was wondering whether our marriage still mattered enough for honesty. She covered her face briefly with both hands before speaking again. Nothing happened the way I imagined it would. I listened without interruption. I thought meeting Jason would somehow help me understand why I felt so disconnected from my own life. Instead, every hour I spent here reminded me of everything I was risking. She paused as her voice trembled. By the second day, I realized I wanted to come home, but I also believed I had already destroyed the one thing that mattered most. I watched her carefully, searching not for perfect words, but for sincerity. For months, I had prepared legal documents, organized financial records, and convinced myself that certainty would make every decision easier. Sitting across from Emily in that quiet hotel suite, I discovered the truth was far more complicated. Finding the evidence had answered every factual question I carried. It had not answered the one question that suddenly mattered more than all the others. After everything that had happened, was there still enough honesty left between us to decide whether this marriage deserved one final chance? Neither of us spoke for several minutes after Emily finished. The silence inside the suite felt different now. It no longer carried the tension of hidden secrets. Instead, it carried the weight of two people finally sitting in front of the truth without anywhere left to hide. I quietly closed the folder and rested both hands on the table. The evidence answered my questions, I said softly. It cannot decide what happens next. Emily slowly nodded, her eyes still fixed on the documents lying between us. Looking back now, I realized I had spent weeks preparing for the possibility of losing my marriage, yet I had never prepared for genuine remorse. I expected denial. I expected excuses. I expected someone to blame stress, loneliness, or circumstances. Instead, Emily accepted responsibility before I ever asked her to. I stopped making good decisions long before this trip, she admitted. The hotel was not where everything started. It was only where every mistake finally became impossible to ignore. I listened carefully without interrupting. She explained that reconnecting with Jason had begun months earlier through a professional networking event. Their first conversations focused entirely on work, mutual colleagues, and career opportunities. Over time, they started talking about old memories, personal frustrations, and the different lives they imagined they might have lived. Every conversation felt harmless until I realized I was sharing thoughts with someone else that should have belonged inside my marriage, she said quietly. By then I had already crossed lines I promised myself I never would. I appreciated that she never tried to minimize her choices. She described them honestly, without asking me to excuse them. Then why come here at all? I asked. Emily looked toward the city lights beyond the window before answering. Because I convinced myself I needed certainty before making any decision about our future. I believed one meeting would answer every question I had been avoiding. She shook her head slowly. Instead, I spent less than a day realizing I had confused curiosity with happiness. The life I imagined did not exist. I kept comparing every conversation to the life we built together, and I understood how much I was risking. She paused for several seconds before continuing. I plan to return home and tell you everything. even if it meant losing you. I believed she meant every word, but belief alone could not erase 6 months of broken trust. Yesterday morning, she continued, I told Jason this was a mistake. We agreed there could never be another meeting after this trip. She reached into her purse, removed her return boarding pass, and placed it beside the folder. I came back because I wanted to face whatever consequences waited for me. I simply never imagined you would already be here. I looked at the boarding pass, then back at Emily. During the previous month, I had organized financial records, consulted an attorney, protected our shared assets, and prepared for the possibility that our marriage had already ended. Every practical step had given me confidence. None of them answered the emotional question now sitting quietly between us. Could trust ever return after being broken this deeply? I finally stood from my chair and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched across the skyline, each one belonging to another family carrying struggles invisible to everyone else. Without turning around, I spoke calmly. Tonight is not the night we decide the rest of our lives. Emily remained silent, allowing me to finish. Real decisions should never be made in the middle of the worst day of a marriage. We will go home. We will tell each other the complete truth. Then we will decide whether there is still something worth rebuilding. For the first time since I knocked on that hotel door, I saw a small expression of hope appear through the regret on Emily's face. It was not hope built on forgiveness already given. It was hope built on one simple truth. After months of silence, we had finally started speaking honestly, and whatever happened next would be determined not by hidden secrets, but by the choices we made from that moment forward. When we left the hotel the following morning, neither of us tried to pretend the previous evening had never happened. The drive home was quiet, but it was no longer the silence created by avoidance. It was the silence of two people carrying the full weight of reality while understanding that every word spoken from that point forward would matter. Emily sat beside me looking out the passenger window for most of the trip, occasionally glancing toward me as though searching for the right place to begin another difficult conversation. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, focusing on the highway stretching ahead instead of the questions still filling my mind. Looking back now, I realized that forgiveness never begins with an apology. It begins with consistency. Words can express regret in a single afternoon. Trust requires countless ordinary days to prove those words are true. When we arrived home, everything looked exactly as we had left it. The morning newspaper still rested near the front door. The maple tree in our front yard moved gently in the breeze. Our neighbors were mowing their lawns and walking their dogs, completely unaware that our lives had changed forever during the past 48 hours. Emily carried her suitcase inside without saying anything. She stopped in the living room and quietly removed her wedding ring before placing it on the coffee table. I am not giving this back, she said softly. I am placing it here because I have not earned the right to wear it until you decide whether our marriage still has a future. I looked at the ring for several moments before answering. Leave it there for now. She nodded without objection. Later that afternoon, I kept another appointment with the family law attorney I had consulted several weeks earlier. I explained everything that had happened, including the conversation at the hotel and Emily's willingness to accept responsibility. The attorney listened carefully before asking only one question. Have you already decided whether you want a divorce? I looked toward the office window and answered honestly. No, I have decided that I will not make the biggest decision of my life while I am still processing the biggest disappointment of my life. She smiled gently and closed the folder she had prepared. Then give yourself time. Protect your legal interests, continue documenting important matters, and allow actions to speak louder than promises. Her advice matched exactly what my own instincts had been telling me. That evening I returned home and found Emily sitting alone on the back patio, watching the sunset disappear beyond the fence. She stood as I approached, but remained several feet away, respecting the distance that now existed between us. How did the meeting go? She asked quietly. The attorney told me not to rush, I replied. Emily slowly nodded. I would have given you the same advice if our positions were reversed. There was no self-pity in her voice, only acceptance. Over the following weeks, she never once asked whether I had reached a decision. Instead, she focused on rebuilding honesty through small actions. She shared every travel schedule before I asked. She left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter without making a performance of it. She answered difficult questions directly, even when the answers reflected poorly on her choices. I noticed every effort, but I also understood that rebuilding trust was not measured in days or even weeks. It would require time, patience, and a willingness from both of us to confront conversations we had postponed for far too long. As autumn slowly replaced summer outside our windows, I realized something unexpected. The future of our marriage would not be determined by the worst mistake either of us had experienced. It would be determined by whether we could continue choosing honesty long after the crisis itself had become part of our past. Over the next several months, our home slowly became a place where honesty replaced assumptions. Nothing changed overnight, and neither of us expected it to. Looking back now, I realized that rebuilding trust was never about creating one unforgettable moment. It was about hundreds of ordinary moments handled differently than before. Emily no longer hid behind vague explanations or incomplete answers. Every business trip was discussed together long before it appeared on her calendar. Every change in her schedule became a conversation instead of a surprise. She never complained when I asked difficult questions because she understood those questions were the natural consequence of choices that had nearly ended our marriage. I also had responsibilities of my own. I could not keep punishing her every day for mistakes she had already admitted. If I truly wanted to discover whether our marriage still had a future, I needed to judge her by the consistency of her present actions instead of remaining trapped inside the memories of the past. That realization was far more difficult than I expected. Some mornings I woke up convinced we were making progress. Other days, an ordinary notification sound or a delayed meeting reminded me of the hotel suite and brought every painful memory rushing back. Whenever that happened, Emily never became defensive. She sat beside me, answered every question honestly, and accepted that healing would happen at my pace rather than hers. About 2 months after returning home, Emily suggested we begin meeting with a licensed marriage counselor. I agreed because I wanted someone outside our situation to challenge both of us with the questions we had avoided for years. During one session, the counselor looked at us and asked, "When did your conversations stop becoming honest?" Neither of us answered immediately. Finally, I admitted that I had spent years assuming Emily already knew what I felt without actually saying it. Emily quietly confessed that she had slowly replaced difficult conversations with comfortable silence because she feared disappointing me. The counselor nodded thoughtfully before explaining that marriages rarely collapse because of one terrible day. They usually weaken through countless small moments when honest communication is postponed until distance quietly becomes normal. Those words stayed with both of us long after the session ended. We began rebuilding simple habits that had disappeared long before the hotel. We prepared dinner together several nights each week. We walked through the neighborhood after work without bringing our phones. We planned weekend drives along the California coast simply to spend uninterrupted time together. None of those experiences erased the past, but each one added another honest memory beside the painful ones we were slowly learning to carry. One Saturday afternoon, we visited the small lakeside park where I had proposed to Emily years earlier. We stood quietly on the wooden bridge overlooking the water while autumn leaves drifted across the surface. Emily looked toward the place where I had once asked her to marry me and softly said, "I almost lost this because I stopped protecting it." I understood exactly what she meant. Love had never disappeared from our marriage. Attention had. Honesty had. Gratitude had. As we walked back toward the parking lot with our hands gently intertwined for the first time in many months, I realized I was no longer measuring our future by the worst chapter of our story. Instead, I had quietly begun measuring it by the choices we continued making after the truth had finally been revealed, and those choices were slowly becoming stronger than the mistakes that once seemed impossible to overcome. Nearly a year has passed since the evening I stood outside that hotel suite with a folder in my hand and more questions than answers in my heart. Looking back now, I no longer remember that moment as the night my marriage almost ended. I remember it as the night both of us finally stopped hiding from the truth. Healing did not arrive because time simply passed. It arrived because every day afterward demanded another honest choice. Emily never asked me to forget what happened. She understood that trust could never be restored by pretending the past no longer existed. Instead, she allowed her actions to speak where promises had once failed. She became transparent about every business trip, every meeting, in every change in her schedule. More importantly, she became emotionally present in ways I had not experienced for years. I also changed. I stopped believing that silence protected a relationship. I learned that difficult conversations held at the right time strengthen a marriage far more than comfortable conversations that avoid reality. We both accepted that love is not maintained through grand gestures. It survives because two people continue choosing honesty even when honesty feels uncomfortable. One quiet Saturday morning, I opened the desk drawer where I had stored the Navy folder that once contained every document I believed would lead to the end of our marriage. Airline confirmations, hotel reservations, financial records, handwritten notes, and carefully organized timelines still rested exactly where I had left them months earlier. I sat there for several minutes looking through each page one last time. Those papers had protected me when uncertainty surrounded every decision. They reminded me that preparing for the truth is never the same as wishing for the worst. After closing the folder, I carried it outside to the recycling bin and let it go. I did not destroy the memories because forgetting was never the goal. I simply chose not to let those pages continue defining our future. Later that afternoon, Emily joined me on the front porch beneath the maple trees we had planted together years before. Their branches stretched high above our home, stronger than either of us ever imagined when they were young saplings. She quietly reached for my hand, and this time there was no hesitation from either of us. We watched children riding bicycles through the neighborhood while the evening sun slowly settled beyond the rooftops. Peace had returned, not because life became perfect again, but because honesty had finally become part of our everyday routine. If there is one lesson this journey taught me, it is that betrayal does not have to become the final chapter of a marriage, but neither does forgiveness happen automatically. Both require courage. Both require accountability. Most importantly, both require two people willing to face the truth without running from it. That knock on the hotel door changed everything I believed about trust. Yet it also reminded me that the strongest relationships are not built by people who never make mistakes. They are built by people who eventually find the strength to accept responsibility, rebuild what was broken through consistent actions, and choose one another again with open eyes and honest hearts.